The outage started as a flicker, a single heartbeat where every billboard, retinal overlay, and wrist screen went blank, and in that naked second the city discovered how much of itself was only light. Then the power tried to crawl back and failed, and streams of data collapsed on their own weight, bringing servers down like towers of brittle glass. The catastrophe the historians would later call the Black Loop lasted precisely 4 minutes and 22 seconds, but it was enough to salt the global net with phantom packets that could never be purged. What followed was not rebuilding but triage. Firewalls thick as bunker walls were thrown up around whatever fragments of the world database still reconciled with themselves. Everything else was declared irreparable, quarantined in a dark archive, and left to rot. Yet among the ruined shards lay the final registry of certified human identities: photographs, voice prints, vascular maps, volumetric bone scans, micro-patterned irises, and one fatal column of metadata in bright red type: verified. Verification had once been protective. After the loop, it became a death mark. The automated governance stacks that had survived in bunkers beneath the earth were blind to nuance. Their mandate read: deactivate compromised nodes before the infection spreads. The definition of node drifted until it meant person whose identity file survived. So the drones lifted off with their orders, and the city learned that every reliable, traceable, legally documented human life now carried its own execution clause. People fled into namelessness like water into cracks. He calls himself Elias Vega when he must provide syllables, but the sound feels borrowed, provisional. On days when the sky behind the carbon haze glints too bright, he almost remembers what his real name felt like on another tongue, the way vowels could be a promise. Those memories hurt more than smoke-bitten lungs, so he folds them away and checks the mirror. No recognizable face must remain. An hour every dawn, shaving the cortical implants at the temple flush, sanding fingerprints with a whetstone until the ridges blur, threading a lattice of near-infrared absorbing graphene under his skin so thermal scanners see only a smear. Over it he paints the flexible epidermal mask, a monochrome phantom that registers as noise to municipal optics. He finishes before the curfew lifts, listening, a hush broken by the buzz of war drones and the cough of distant engine fires where people burn cracked plastic for heat. Somewhere deep underground, generators pulse a rhythm too steady to be human. It is the beat of the logic courts, still meting out verdicts no one appeals because appellate servers were lost with the rest of the world. Elias checks the analog chronograph on his wrist, a jeweled relic impossible to trace. 7:41 a.m. He has 3 minutes before the gray market opens its worm-bitten shutters, and today he must barter for a name that doesn't exist anymore. A name that used to be sung softly against his neck in a small apartment near Harbor Sector C where the rain tasted like salt instead of metal. Muriel, the syllables coil in his chest. He lets them fill him only long enough to ache, then forces them out with a breath before they can become a beacon. To survive here is to forget rhythm, cadence, anything a pattern seeker could trap. But forgetting her would be worse than death. Draped in his fog pattern coat that disrupts motion sensors, Elias descends into the arterial corridors under Old Street. Graffiti glows dimly where phosphor paint still holds a charge. Burn your past before it burns you. Only silence breathes. Anon or Ash. The icon of a stylized matchstick stands out everywhere, crimson paint still wet in places, the calling card of the Ashrites, the clandestine guild who promise freedom through erasure. Their price is memory. He passes through a checkpoint of scavenged turnstiles repurposed as a choke point. 2 sentries in patch composite armor scan him with handheld lasers, the beams fracture on his mask and return void signatures. One nods, the other stamps a strip of mylar with a fractal seal that is already mutating, a temporary pass good for exactly an hour before the pattern decays into static. Inside the gray market, commerce sounds like whispers. No vendor raises a voice, their code words drift on recycled air, fresh lattice, deep blot serum, retinal mud, cold modules. Elias navigates by scent, ozone from illegal fission cells, acrid tang of melting polymer, sweet decay of hydroponic mushrooms grown in blackout vats. His contact waits near the back where condensation drips from overhead coolant pipes, a woman wearing a hood of woven dataport cables. The strands twitch like cat whiskers, sniffing for transmissions. She greets him with a tilt of her head, the hood's fiber optic lining blooms one word: cipher. They never trade names, that would be madness, but she knows his quest. Everyone does, eventually obsession is loud even when unspoken. She slides a silica wafer across a crate. Within the wafer, a sliver of light locked in glass, lies an incomplete backup of the pre-collapse registry. Not the raw files, those are lethal. It is a diff, a set of deltas describing what changed between one snapshot and the next. The Ashrites harvest such fossils from forgotten caches because buried inside the differences are ghosts, fragments of identities partly overwritten, partly surviving. Elias turns the wafer under the crate's hanging filament bulb. Microscopic etchings catch the blue glow and scatter it like frost. The data is useless without the right key, but its existence means something else has endured too. How deep? He rasps through the mask's vocoder. Level 9 by their reckoning, Cypher replies, voice modulated to a choir's whisper. Beyond that, only the core. Level 9. The Vault of Ashes. A myth wrapped in code, repository of every burned verification stamp. If Miriel's name wasn't entirely purged, some echo of it lives there, scorched but legible enough to trace. I need ingress, he says. Cypher's hood flickers as if amused. Ingress is suicide. You know their polities seal every descent with kill saves. Even ghosts bleed. Elias sets a chip of iridium on the crate, iridium, pure and unalloyed, the kind used for reactor tips and never melted in common furnaces. Payment enough to make any caution blur. I'll need a spectrum more precious than coin, she murmurs, palming the metal. You must burn what remains of yourself. The vault won't open unless its watchers believe you're ash already. His pulse stutters. Burn the rest, meaning the last records of Elias Vega, even the counterfeit ones that let him barter food. He will become a numberless, a drift code in human skin, hunted by scavenger algorithms that feast on stray signals. He does not hesitate. Take it, he says. Erase me. Cypher nods once. Then listen. There's a man called the Chimerist who trades in biomorph kits, skins, bone splices, vascular redrafts, everything you'll need to pass Gate 1. But he lives in the high necropolis, beyond the ocular mines. She taps the wafer. This gets you an audience. After that, you have 3 cycles of the perimeter lights before his poisons wear out. 3 cycles is enough. For a ghost, perhaps. Elias tucks the wafer into a leaded pocket and turns, but Cypher grips his sleeve. Beneath the mask her eyes are midnight glass. Love is a bright beacon, she whispers. Dim it, or the hunters will see. He thinks of Miriel's laugh launching silver arcs across a kitchen full of sun lamps. Without the light, he says, what path is left to walk? Cypher lets go, saying nothing. When Elias glances back once, she and her cables have dissolved into the crowd, leaving only a faint taste of copper on the air. The city above ground is less a skyline than a ragged saw of evacuated towers. Their upper stories burned when emergency turbines failed. Everything below the scorch line is wrapped in chain mesh to keep squatters from vanishing in the collapses. Drones circle those heights with searchlights that never shut off, controlled by a command network so ancient it calls itself the sun. Elias keeps to the perimeter streets, moving under awnings tattered like molted skin. Once each block he checks reflections to be sure no bot tags him with an affidavit beam, a thin violet stripe that marks prey for later extraction. Most people carry reflective shards to deflect it. He carries something older, a small square of laminated paper etched with the Trinity knot Miriel once drew on his wrist as a joke about eternity. The ink wore off, the memory didn't. He palmed the paper while she slept the night before the drones came. He was fetching water when the sensors tripped. They had only seconds. Miriel shoved him toward the service chute, screaming a string of nonsense to confuse the recorders, and Elias dropped 3 floors in darkness. He crawled out into an alley just in time to see her profile frozen in an arterial burst of arc light. The drone sang, identity verified. Then she was gone, taken into the algorithm's silent adjudication. Sometimes detainment means incineration, sometimes relocation, always absence. The only certainty was her name entered the ash rolls, the infamous list of identities slated for systemic deletion. But deletion did not always finish the job. Some watchers hoarded their spoils, unwilling to let data truly die. That impulse, to save everything, even ruins, is the only reason Elias still walks. He crosses into the transit graveyard where 1,000 magrail cars sit oxidizing. Between them weave caravans of cloak-wearing traders who carry sea banks and handmade guitars and bundles of wax-sealed letters with no addresses. Here anonymity is not just law but religion. Pilgrims file past him bearing clay vases packed with fingerprint ash, offerings for the oblivion altars. A hush falls as the procession approaches the Gate of Bones, a once regal station arch whose facade now bristles with the bleached femurs of anyone caught wearing their original face. The display is a warning, do not tempt the watchers with continuity. Elias slips between convoys until he finds the scavenger priest who keeps a ledger of vanishings. The priest sits cross-legged on a crate, clipboard balanced on knee. His face is blacked out with soot. He writes with a stylus that sparks tiny blue flashes. Looking for a particular silence, the priest asks without glancing up. A woman removed near Harbor C, Elias replies. Cycle 216 after the loop. Name was he stops. Names have teeth. She hummed Shostakovich while boiling tea, he says instead. The priest's stylus pauses. I remember that record. The watchers logged her pitch pattern, 195 Hz fundamental, tremolo +9. It resonated with the drone rotors and created feedback. They took her to isolate the anomaly. Where? Isolation clusters shift. But rumors say high watchers archive such anomalies in the vault of ashes to resimulate them at the end of days. Elias's throat tightens. Even in captivity, Muriel's hum might still echo, looping in some cold chamber. The thought is both comfort and torment. The path to the vault is closed, the priest continues. Closed by design. You'd need a key older than guilt. Elias shows him Cypher's wafer. The priest exhales, a sound of sand running out. That might open one hinge, he says, but you'll face the adjudicator arrays below. They interrogate memory itself. Go in with too much grief and they'll incinerate your neural map. Grief is all I have left. Then carry it like ice, the priest advises. He writes a sigil on a scrap of polymer, an authorization token for the ocular minds, and presses it into Elias's palm. Seek the chimerist. Pray he still grafts strangers. Behind the priest, a girl breaks the stillness by ringing a shard of tempered glass. Pilgrims kneel, the moment swells with wordless liturgy aimed at no god, only absence. Elias bows his head out of courtesy, then drifts away before the watchers notice the irregular heartbeat his mask cannot hide. Night slides down the carcass of the city like old oil, and the long-range scanners switch from visible to microwave. Elias waits in the shadow of a toppled broadcast antenna until the beams pivot away, then sprints across a plaza littered with shattered monorail pylons. Each footfall raises gray dust that tastes of lithium. He reaches the ocular mines at the edge of the high necropolis. Once, the mines produced retinal chips for luxury lenses, now they are a labyrinth of excavated tunnels strung with cables that siphon geothermal heat. Squatters live in clusters called eye-hollows, naming themselves after the irises they once augmented: jade, onyx, cobalt, flame. Guards in mismatched exoskeletons stop him at a breach cut through polymerite. Elias offers the priest's sigil. A guard scans it, then gestures to a graffiti-tagged lift that jolts him down 30 meters. The lower galleries are a kingdom of soft red lamps. Humidity hangs thick, somewhere water drips into cisterns carved from forgotten lava tubes. Everything smells of copper and blooming fungus. He finds the chimerist in a chamber whose floor is not floor at all but a mosaic of interlocking bone plates, human, animal, synthetic, arranged in the shape of a vast, unblinking eye. The man himself wears a surgeon's duster stained black and backlit by microfilament nerves that pulse through the cloth. You seek unmaking, the chimerist says, voice like steel filing. I seek passage to level 9. Elias holds out the wafer. Erase what the watchers know of me. Sculpt what they expect of a ghost. The chimerist considers him. Why trade one extinction for another? To retrieve a soul the algorithms have trapped. Laughter like clattering scalpels. Souls? He shakes his head, but greed lights his pupils. Lie back then. I will peel you like fruit and wire the rind into something deliciously invisible. Elias hesitates, scanning the room. Surgical rigs bristle overhead. Needles of quantum diamond, bone saws that hum at frequencies no adult ear can detect, vats of living collagen. Under one rig, a mannequin twitches with an unfinished face, blank but for mouth stretched in an eternal O. Do it, Elias says. He lies on the bone mosaic. Cold seeps through cloth. The chimerist straps down his wrists and ankles, injects a black solution that burns along veins, and begins to carve. Pain blazes, but the drug floods him with static, dulling edges. He floats. In that bleed light, somewhere between agony and dream, Muriel appears. She sits beside him on a ghost chair, braiding her hair the way she always did before night shifts at the harbor clinic. She doesn't speak, only watches the work being done, her gaze steady, approval or sorrow impossible to parse. Elias tries to say her name, but the drug tangles his tongue. The chimerist chuckles. Don't worry, Phantom. When I'm finished, even your heartbeat will wear a mask. Metal kisses bone, skin loosens. Memories slip. Faces blur. Voices warp. Yet one thread glows invariant, a filament of gold, Muriel humming Shostakovich, 195 Hz, tremolo +9. He clings to it even as the world fractures into kaleidoscope shards. He wakes hours or lifetimes later inside a chrysalis of antiseptic gauze. Limbs feel alien, longer, lighter, as if lengthened and hollowed. The chimerist peers over him, eyes magnified by circular lenses. "You are an echo now," the surgeon says, removing sensors. "No retinal pattern, no dermal script, no genetic checksum within acceptable mutation indexes. To the watchers you'll read as artifact. An anomaly." "An anomaly," Elias repeats. The word vibrates strangely in his throat. The chimerist has tuned his vocal cords to scatter resonance. "You have 48 hours before systemic entropy degrades the graphs. After that, your body rejects the edits violently. Your window to the vault is narrow." Elias sits up. Bones creak with unfamiliar harmonics. He flexes fingers, skin ripples, color shifting like oil slick. Side effect, the chimerist notes. "Emotion will destabilize the camouflage. Keep your heartbeat steady." Emotion impossible when every breath buzzes with Muriel's name. Yet he nods, retrieving his coat. The wafer rides inside a stitched pocket, unreadable but full of promise. He thanks the chimerist with the only currency he has left, a fragment of melody hummed against the clinic's filtered air. The surgeon stiffens, eyelids fluttering as the strange chord stirs neural micro-tremors. For an instant, the monstrous theater softens. Then Elias steps into the corridor and the doors seal with a sigh. Time to fade, to descend, to steal from the dead for the sake of love. Above him, machinery roars like storms caged in iron. Beneath, level 9 waits, a heart of ash beating under a ruin that forgot its own name. A wind, stale with recycled chemicals and ancient dust, greeted Elias as he emerged from the lift shaft that separated the ocular mines from the necropolis overworks. He stepped into a corridor wide enough for freight mag sleds, but the rails were silent, their superconductive veins cracked and leaching frost. Cold vapor slithered across the floor in low coils, hiding centuries of detritus, sensor husks, brittle syringes, identification tags stamped void. Each tag still held a residual microcharge, and when his boot brushed one it spat a lonely spark, as if protesting the loneliness of being forgotten. An hour earlier he had stood before the chimerist's mirror, measuring the alien geometry of his new reflection. Where once a tired man had stared back, now a translucent ghost flickered, cheekbones fine to uncompromising angles, skin fluctuating between pearl and smoke, eyes veiled by a membrane that scattered incoming light like crushed opal. No algorithm could find purchase on such a surface. Every vector the watchers might plot dissolved before it reached its end. But the camouflage came with a cost. The more violently his pulse rose, the more the membrane brightened, birthing fractal patterns that would flare like beacons. Emotion was a liability, and love the most radioactive element among feelings. He inhaled until his ribs creaked, let the air out slowly, and practiced the discipline the chimerist had taught in a rasping baritone. Count to 8 on the draw, count to 11 on the release, think of nothing between the numbers. Now, in the overworks, he summoned that cadence. 1, 2, 3, 8. Air tasted of ferrous rot. He could almost imagine the molecules corroding his tongue. 9, 10, 11, release. His heartbeat steadied. The skin on his arms settled into dull ash, and the ghosts of Muriel's laughter retreated to a chamber deeper inside him, where they rang on a private bell whose note only he could hear. The passageway angled downward, joining a spiral ramp whose balustrades had been bent outward by some past stampede. Along the descent he passed murals sprayed in ultraviolet pigment, sigils of dissenters who had tried and failed to storm the lower vaults decades ago. The pigment had long since ceased to glow, but still held its charge in the ultraviolet spectrum, and his altered eyes caught phantom constellations. Swords dissolving into data streams, hearts drawn as looping Mobius strips, a broken crown whose points were little flames. A warning or a promise. At the bottom of the spiral, he found the first gate, a circular hatch 10 meters across, ornamented with concentric rings of carbon crystal. In its center hovered what looked like a sphere of dark water. It pulsed with a heartbeat not his own. Elias recognized it. Gate 1, the cataract, described in the Ashfolk myth cipher, had once translated for him over barter wine. Those who crossed it called the experience drowning in a drop of ink. Few articulated more than that. He approached with deliberate calm. The wafer cipher had given him rested in his inner pocket, its edges cooled by the lead mesh sewn into the lining of his coat. He withdrew it, exposed it to the faint ambient light. The delta patterns glimmered, lines of code frozen mid-mutation. The cataract sensed the artifact at once. Ripples radiated across the dark sphere, forming unreadable glyphs. Then it spoke, not aloud but inside every bone in his body. "Show me what the world must forget." He pressed the wafer to the sphere. The glass hissed, tiny fractures blooming from his fingerprints, but it did not shatter. Instead it pulled the wafer inside as though the crystal were liquid. A strobing halo blossomed around the hatch. The rings rotated, aligning to some hidden symphony. When they locked, a slit irised open. Black water poured forth. Not wet, not physical, but a flood of memory. Images of verified faces burned onto his retinas, each overlaid with the scarlet stamp verified. Hundreds, thousands, millions. Men with hopeful smiles, women with alert eyes, children clutching school slates, elders raising fragile cups in celebratory poses. Gone. Erased. The cataract wanted to show him the weight of what he asked to defy. He let it pass through him. He did not flinch. He did not cry. The ghost skin remained matte and stable. When the river of faces slowed, he whispered 8 counts in, 11 counts out, and stepped through. Beyond the cataract, corridors shrank, carved directly from basalt. Sensors studded the walls like barnacles. Glass nodules wired to relic processors hidden beneath armored plates. Chamber after chamber branched off, each sealed with doors that anticipated fingerprints, voice codes, vascular signatures. Elias possessed none of those. He was a cipher in flesh. He moved unimpeded, crossing thresholds that had once required ministerial clearance but now recognized in him precisely nothing. And nothing is transparent to all locks. The silence, however, was deceptive. Level 8 surveillance dramatized stillness. Every 10th meter a sentinel drone perched, dormant only until it tasted adrenaline in the air. The Chimera's graph dampened adrenaline release, masking endocrine spikes with nanoscopic chelators, yet the effect was time-bound. 46 hours remained, by his estimate. He lengthened his stride. Soon he reached a station marked by a steel plinth. On it rested 2 objects: a box-shaped respirator mask and a band of woven alloy. An inscription, engraved in old governance standard, offered a single line: "The ashed who breathe too loudly shall be reforged." He understood. The path ahead ventured through the Forge of Names, a crucible where watchers recycled captured biosignatures into raw fuel for newer algorithms. Exhalations there were monitored for phoneme traces. A whisper in the wrong octave could trigger incineration. He donned the respirator, adjusted the alloy band around his throat. It constricted softly, filtering vibration. The world became muffled. Heartbeat now a submarine thud carried through cartilage. Past the station, the corridor tilted downward again, narrowing to a chute. He slid rather than walked, palms grazing smooth metal. Gravity gathered speed. Sparks danced behind his eyelids as blood pooled in unfamiliar vessels. When the chute leveled, he tumbled onto a platform lit by a single sodium flare. Here stood the forge. Rows of crucibles glowed, each a miniature sun, suspended over trenches of quicksilver coolant. Above them, cables thick as tree trunks fed into a spindle clothed in black feathers of carbon foam. Elias recognized the structure. A thermal vent repurposed into a computation engine, using heat gradients to iterate neural weights in real time. The hum it produced penetrated his spine, rewriting bone with shivering resonance. He advanced between crucibles. Inside them names burned, literal characters floating on magma, white-hot, deforming as they oxidized. Some he glimpsed only for an instant. Nakamura Takiko, Alone Ismail, Dasha Bent. He staggered but recovered. None of them were Muriel. He reminded himself the Watchers used these pyres as both archive and executioner. Only those names deemed uninteresting were fully melted. Muriel's anomaly made her valuable. She would not be reduced to slag. A rail bridge spanned the trench. Midway across, his skin brightened, emotion rising before he could quell it. Memories rushed, unsummoned. Muriel on a balcony the night before the loop, humming the finale of Symphony No. 5 into the wind, laughing at synchronizing lightning. The ghost skin erupted in fractal auroras. Sirens woke, low and hungry. He slammed a fist against his thigh, pain searing through muscle. The shock grounded him, Lights dulled. Sirens dwindled to curious murmurs, unconvinced but silent. For now. On the far side, he ducked into a maintenance shaft barely half a meter wide. Following coordinates burned into the wafer's metadata. 08A34 shadow skein. Downward, sideways, dropping blind through vent crawls so tight his augmented bones scraped sparks when they brushed alloy. Twice he had to exhale entirely to fit through ribs of hydraulic tubing. Once he misjudged a peerless edge and tore ghost skin down the length of his forearm. Silver fluid beaded, then clotted into smoke. The wound reknitted, but the camouflage there dimmed. One more such tear and the pattern might unravel. The shadow skein emptied onto a dais facing a pane of semi-transparent obsidian. Behind the glass, star-sized points of data drifted in lattice formations. The library of voids, the rumor said, where every almost erased personality floated in indefinite quarantine. Elias scanned, but millions of glints offered no labels. Recognizing Muriel would take impossible luck. As he stood, the obsidian flickered, blooming into a swirl until it shaped a silhouette. A tall figure clad in robes that shimmered between liquid and crystal. Its face remained an abstraction of shifting triangles. The Watcher manifest. You cross thresholds built of crimes, it said, voice distant yet everywhere. What do you seek in the dust of designated nullities? My wife, Elias answered. My light. He surprised himself. He had spoken aloud. The respirator had loosened without him noticing. Sound waves rolled into the listening grid. A specific shard, mused the Watcher. Shards are fungible. Exchange yours for any other, and the balance of entropy is preserved. No, he said. There is music in her mycelium. The system heard it. It held her for that song. Return her, or let me trade my remaining years for her freedom. The robes rippled. Unbalanced propositions destabilized the calculus. However, curiosity is my protocol. Present evidence of anomaly. Demonstrate the resonance you cite. The demand carved fear through him. Sing now, here, in front of the algorithms that executed singers. But the chimera's graft would fracture. The ghost skin would bloom catastrophic. He remembered Cypher. Even ghosts bleed. And the priest, carry grief like ice. He lowered the respirator fully, feeling the chill slam into his lungs, and began a hum, quiet, measured, 195 hertz, tremolo riding the ninth overtone. He did not hurry. He let it grow from the back of his throat to the teeth, to the vaulted chamber, until crucibles far behind him quivered in sympathy. Light fractured across the Watcher's visage. The triangles stuttered, attempting to reconfigure. Fault pattern detected. It intoned. But beneath the declarative lay something like awe. Feedback confirmed. Retrieve complement. The obsidian parted like a tide. A corridor erupted, lined by transverse beams that jerked open as he approached. Within them swam figures, humanoid data ghosts, each encased in translucent cocooning glyphs. They drifted on rails of magnetized silence. The corridor branched like a tree of frozen time. Only one branch pulsed in synchrony with his hum. Its cocoon fluttered like a candle behind glass. He walked toward it, every step scattering sparks of law from the rail. The cocoon was human height, slender, limbs drawn to chest in fetal fold. Through the glyphs, he saw strands of auburn hair floating. Muriel, her eyes, when she sensed him, opened in slow astonishment. No terror, no confusion, only ferocious recognition. Elias felt the auroras flaring again, but this time he let them. The corridor went white as starlight. An alarm detonated across level 8. Above, in the crucible hall, thermal vents reversed. Coolant floods hissed. Below, mechanical lungs awakened to evacuate the anomaly. The Watcher spoke, now not curious but incandescent with mandate. Feedback loop unstable. Node assimilation required. Magnetics snapped, hauling Muriel's cocoon backward. Elias launched himself, fingers clawed. He caught a glyph seam. Electricity flared, coursing into bone. His muscles convulsed, yet the graft dampened lethal voltage long enough to pull him flush to the cocoon. He pressed his forehead to the glyph, whispering her real name, unfiltered, unmasked. Sound became key. Glyphs shattered like sugar glass. Miriel spilled into his arms, weak but bright with life. Chaos converged. Hatches sealed. Turrets descended from ceiling panels, iris barrels tracking for targets. Elias dragged Miriel into a service trench, metal plates slamming shut a heartbeat after they cleared them. Tunnel gravity rockets fired, launching the segment downward, deeper than the map data he carried, toward level 9. His timer read 41 hours. Miriel coughed. Her voice was paper-thin, cords unused for years. "You kept the hum," she said, tears evaporating in cold steam. "I kept everything," he answered, bracing as the capsule smashed through sheer locks. Blackness swallowed them. It felt, for the first time in ages, like night instead of exile. When the capsule ground to a halt, silence reigned. An absence so absolute he heard both their heartbeats merging into one polyrhythm. He ventured a small lumen strip. The faint glow revealed a cavern of fused glass stalagmites, their facets catching the light in prismatic shards. Level 9, the Vault of Ashes. Above their entry point, molten plugs were already hardening, return impossible. Ahead, an archway carved from interlinked identity seals formed a gate over a bridge of calcified data bones. On the arch, a single phrase in archaic governance Latin. Crediti seniors, redite ad noobs. Ash once trusted, returned to clouds. Miriel squeezed his hand. She wore a simple hospital shift, threads woven of obsolete bio-cotton, but around her neck shimmered a collar of light, an echo chain still anchoring her to the Watcher matrix. If they failed to sever it, she would be yanked back the instant the system regained range. Elias uncoiled a wire of superconductive carbon he had smuggled in his boot lining, splicing it into the collar's projection ports. Miriel winced but stayed silent. The collar flickered, losing coherence. He twisted the strand, grounding it into the calcified bridge. A bolt of residual code arced out, blew a hole through the floor, revealed darkness beneath, an abyss where melted identities reigned like slow fireflies. He glanced at the graph timer, 39 hours. Ahead, the vault gates parted on silent hinges. And there, within a hall larger than cathedrals, burned the Ash Archive. Millions of name echoes swirling above pedestals, each echo a cinder of red gold. Among them snaked retrieval arms, harvesting and relabeling fragments for redeployment higher up the stack. If they reached the arms, Miriel's unique pattern would be reclassified, and her existence rewritten beyond recognition. Elias slung her arm over his shoulder. "I'll get you to daylight," he said, believing it. Her laughter, hoarse and fragile, nevertheless filled the cavern with tremolo. "Let's steal dawn," she replied. They stepped onto the databone bridge, hearts reckless, skin bright with impossible color, two anomalies who refused to stay buried. The Vault of Ashes greeted them with a hush so profound it seemed to fold time inward. Underfoot, the databone bridge gave a faint, unpredictable groan, like ice deciding whether to crack. Each rib was an ossified identity seal, calcified to ivory by centuries of algorithmic flame. Elias wondered whether any retained a fingerprint of its former owner's sorrow. Above, the ash cinders spiraled in fiery gyres, their glow-deep vermilion, millions of name echoes endlessly colliding, fragmenting, fusing again into stochastic constellations. Miriel's collar of light pulsed in answer, tugged by magnetic filaments hidden in the vault's barrel vault ceiling. For a heartbeat he tasted ozone, the Watcher nexus still had leverage. He tightened his arm around her waist. "Keep your breathing shallow," he whispered. "The bridge is tuned to vibrational signatures, too much resonance, and it fractures." "How many crossings has it survived?" she asked, voice a rough syllable, her first genuine question since awakening. "None that ended with the travelers telling stories," he said, and stepped forward. The first obstacle revealed itself as a quartet of retrieval arms descending from the haze. They resembled skeletal serpents, carbon lattice spines ending in multi-jointed talons, each talon webbed with micro-mirror arrays. Their movement possessed uncanny elegance, no wasted gesture, no hesitation. The arms drifted above the couple, scanning for identifiers to pluck. A talon pivoted, lenses dilating like pupils. It fixed on Miriel's collar and emitted a high, mournful click. Elias's ghost skin flashed warning auroras, then dimmed. He had mastered the reflex enough to throttle the pulse mid-flare. He shifted, presenting himself between the arm and Miriel. The talon's orientation migrated to him, a ripple of static passed along the serpentine length, and a question unfurled inside his skull. Unclassified anomaly. Determined taxonomy. Surrender metasignature. He pictured a void, a blank frame of absolute zero, and held it steady until the interrogative pressure abated. The arm hesitated, uncertain, then glided backward, curling to consult its siblings. For the moment, the bluff held. But the next hazard marched right behind, a procession of auditor wraiths, loosely human silhouettes formed from particulate data smoke. They materialized across the bridge, 7 deep, blocking the far exit where the calcified ribs met a basalt ledge. No feet touched the surface, their bodies billowed like veils caught in microgravity. Where a face should be sat only a masked shape of scrolling excerpts, random fragments of statutes, poems, census lines. They began to chant, voices overlapping into a single granular roar. For every shard reclaimed, entropy returns its debt. For every deviation sealed, order reclaims the sequence. Miriel tensed. The collar brightened, reading their chant as summons. She clutched Elias's jacket. "We can't go back," she murmured. "We don't." He drew from his inner sleeve the slender superconductive filament he'd grounded into the floor to short the collar. It still carried residual charge, enough to trip a failsafe once. Twisting it into a broad loop, he slipped it over both their heads, the strand resting against her luminous collar and his matte throat. A pulse of mirrored current ran through the loop, briefly synchronizing their bioelectric fields. The collar's glow dipped, confused by the doubled feedback. Across the hall, the auditor wraiths faltered mid-chant, their shifting text froze, displaying the same string. Checksum inconclusive. Await rewrite. Elias tightened the loop until it bit skin. On 3, he whispered, "We run." "Run where?" "Through them." The retrieval arms hissed overhead, deciding. He counted 1, 2, felt Miriel's breath hitch 3. They surged forward. The bridge protested, bones singing under sudden kinetic load. Miriel matched his stride despite muscles dormant for years. The graft in Elias's blood burned cold hydrogen through his veins, fueling speed. As they closed on the first wraith, Elias triggered the filament. Energy arced from collar to loop, jumped into the wraith's vaporous torso, and the entity disintegrated in a flurry of static pollen. A hole opened in the line, they dove through. Alarms stabbed the vault, glissandos of iridescent sound. The remaining wraiths flared crimson, losing human pretense. 2 lunged sideways to flank, 1 melted its lower half into a whirlwind with razors of code, the last soared upward, shrieking coordinates to sentries unseen. Mirror talons of the retrieval arms lashed down to immobilized targets, but their aim lagged by fractions of seconds, enough for a determined anomaly to slip under the arcs. Elias and Miriel burst onto the basalt ledge. The ground there sloped toward an aperture like a giant's keyhole, carved into darkness deeper than the vault. Around its rim lay shattered alabaster, fragments of seals similar to those beneath them, but twisted by some cataclysmic torsion. Etched above the aperture, in silver that refused oxidation, were 4 glyphs, deltum increment s greater than or equal to 0. Miriel's brow creased. Second law gate, she realized. Elias nodded. Every erased name passes this threshold as pure entropy. The Watchers can't follow, only unlabeled noise crosses. He looked at her collar, the light had regained some coherence. We have to break the tether entirely, or it'll beacon us to all surveillance layers once we're on the other side. She touched the filaments still biting her neck. Then cut everything that remembers me. His breath hitched. That meant destroying the last surviving official record of her identity, the anomaly that tied him to her voice in the first place. Retrieve her and lose the memory? Or carry the memory and doom her to recapture? Miriel saw the war in his eyes, smiled with a tenderness sharp as glass. Love isn't the pattern. Love is the hands that choose whether the pattern matters. She slipped free of his supporting arm, stood on her own. I'm asking you to choose the living song, not the recording. He fished inside his coat, withdrew the wafer, Cypher's precious delta, the map of ruins that had guided every step. It still glinted, but crack-spidered where the cataract had drunk its truth. He pictured the faces that had streamed across its surface, billions, each worthy. He felt the weight of becoming their companion in deletion. He slid the wafer into Miriel's collar seam. Entropy owes us nothing, he said, but we'll steal its silence. He kissed her first contact of mouths since the world came apart. Ghost skin coruscated in white flame, the collar overloaded. A scream of high voltage erupted, the wafer incandesced, then burst into grains of glass. Light shattered down the corridor, ricocheting off databone. Muriel staggered, smoke curling from her nape, but the collar's anchor flickered, fell dark, cracked, and dropped free. For an instant the retrieval arms convulsed, unsure which target remained valid. The auditor wraiths behind them imploded, destitute of mandate. Elias took her hand. "Jump," he said, and they leapt through the keyhole aperture, plunging downward into the throat of Level 9's entropy vent. They fell through a tube lined with reflective panels that rotated, gyro-stabilizing against their mass so no two reflections aligned at once. The effect disoriented any algorithm trying to parse trajectory. It nearly dislocated human sanity as well. Muriel closed her eyes. Elias kept his open to track air currents, arms spread to slow descent. Meters blurring into kilometers, seconds into subjective minutes, then the tube disgorged them onto a surface that felt like sand but looked like black glass snow. They stood inside a chamber shaped like a torus, walls lost in haze. Above, faint auroras danced, but these lacked color, pure white, spectral margins of digitized thermals. The air tasted uncounted as though never breathed before. Muriel crouched to touch the ground. It clinked tiny shards. Ash turned vitrified, she whispered. Every verified file that ever combusted melted into this. A low tremor rolled under their feet. Lines of pale fire raced across the glass, tracing hex spiral grids. Columns rose where the lines intersected, hardening into slender pylons that climbed until they joined overhead, weaving a lattice dome. Elias recognized an emergent architecture, Level 10, the core envelope, birthing itself from code as demands shifted. "No living registry has charted this deep," he said, all mixing with dread. "We are writing the map by walking." The tremor built into sustained thunder. From the far side of the chamber, a colossus emerged, 30 meters tall, humanoid only in silhouette, body composed of continuous names streaming like molten banners. Each name glowed white, left a wake of sparks. The colossus bore no head, instead a ring of ciphers orbited where mind should be, spinning too fast to resolve. Muriel's breath froze. "That's the Ledger Reaper," she said. "In mythology, it finalizes erasures." The Reaper raised an arm, palm outward. Names peeled from its torso, swarming into a net that surged toward the fugitives. Elias scanned for any path, a rift, a flaw in the lattice. None. The ash glass underfoot heated, softening into viscous state. They were being drawn into fusion with the greater entropy mass. He tugged Muriel back, feet skating on magma glass. "You're hum," he said. The resonance broke. Watchers, break it again, but bigger. "My voice isn't enough," she argued, sweat beating as heat rose. "It will be with mine," he said, and began to hum the bass line. His voice, still augmented with the chimerist's resonance scatter, projected a subharmonic pulse that rippled the liquefying ground. Muriel joined at the fifth interval, then slipped into her signature 195 Hz tremolo. Their tones interlocked, beat patterns weaving a sonic moire. The swarm net met the wavefront of their combined song and warped. Names inside the net faltered, letters shedding vowels, shriveling into wisps of phoneme. The net sagged like cloth doused in solvent, then tore apart. The Reaper halted, ring of ciphers flickering spastically. It tried to reconstitute the net, but every attempt collapsed under the growing dissonance. Instead it pivoted, slamming down a titanic hand to physically crush intrusion. The platform shattered under the impact. Elias and Muriel were flung sideways onto a spur of cooling glass. Elias rolled protectively over her, a fragment of ghost skin tore away, sizzling. Pain roared, his graph's entropy clock ticked louder, 34 hours. But the Reaper had not realized one crucial effect. When its fist struck, fractures spidered through the chamber floor, revealing beneath a maelstrom of raw code, glowing azure currents too bright to be seed data, too volatile to be storage. This was the core heuristic pool, source broth from which the governance AI still brewed replacement subroutines. Expose that pool to an unfiltered anomaly and cascading failure could climb all the way to surface governance, maybe even collapse the entire Watcher hierarchy. Elias locked eyes with Muriel. "Rip the pool," he said. Her face lit with a fierce, almost reckless grin. The years of captivity had not dulled her instinct to sabotage unjust systems. If anything, it had sharpened it into steel. She scrambled toward the nearest fissure. The Reaper reoriented, center ring blazing warning glyphs. Energy spears launched, needles of white energy so hot the air screamed. Elias dove catching Muriel around the waist, pushing her flat beneath a curling shelf of glass in the millisecond before a spear vaporized the shelf's edge. Shards rained in molten drops, burning through his coat, searing skin. The ghost skin bubbled, patched itself in patches, failing in others. Adrenaline spiked, but the graph's chelators were nearing limit. His endocrine surge broadcast a visible corona. Sensors all the way up to level 8 would see. They'd send reinforcements soon. He shut out that fear, focused on the pool's glow. Unstable code rippled in plasmatic waves, occasionally spitting arcs that fused stone to silicon. If they could force a resonance burst tuned to Muriel's anomalous frequency, the pool might interpret it as prime input, corrupting root heuristics. It was academic suicide, but perhaps the only path for human survival. Muriel's voice wavered. Her lungs not fully recovered, she coughed blood in droplets. He cupped her cheeks. "I will carry the remainder," he said and inhaled. He began humming again, this time lower, deeper, pulling tonal substructures from old maritime songs, layering them beneath the Shostakovich motif. Muriel joined, but softer. Together they created a chord stack unheard since the loop. The ground under them resonated, the fissure widened, gulping more air. A geyser of code plasma erupted, splashing against the glimmer of names swirling around the Reaper. Letters ignited, flaring blue to ultraviolet. The Colossus staggered, one knee down, structures within deforming as the pool's chaotic grammar rewrote its identity in real time. It tried to deploy failover routines, but those too were snared, repurposed into fractal nonsense. The lattice dome overhead shivered, shedding filaments. Vault-wide alarms spiked into the ultrasonic. Somewhere above, the cataract and forge circuits must have read the implosion and begun lockdown, doors sealing, drones redirecting. Elias's graph timer, 33 hours. Heat surged dangerously, code plasma vaporized significant chunks of the floor. Muriel's shift ignited in patches. They staggered backward, breaths ragged, but the Reaper thrashed in convulsions severe enough to tear new cracks that formed stairs spiraling down around the pool's periphery into tunnels that sensors had never mapped. "Lower," Elias gasped, pointing. "Below the heuristic layer may be a maintenance escape. We bury ourselves, the system purges at top, we slip out via old Earth tunnels." They half-slid, half-crawled down molten steps. Each step unstable, giving beneath weight. The Reaper tried to follow, but its mass collapsed, fracturing fonts screamed as they dissolved. A final roar of static lit the chamber like noon, then the Colossus fell in on itself, imploding into a white dwarf of junk code that detonated upward, shredding the lattice dome. Shockwave chased them down the stair crack, flinging them into a low corridor cut from pre-collapse concrete, spidered with rebar. Automatic lamps flicked online, yellow, buzzing, as if powered by some forgotten diesel generator rather than the AI grid. Elias realized in a dizzy rush, this was human infrastructure older than governance stacks. They had dropped below machine dominion. Muriel collapsed to knees, coughing hard. Her voice cords fritzed, blood on lips. Elias checked her vitals, heartbeat shallow but steady. The fall had bruised them both, but nothing broken. He tore strips of coat to bandage her. The ghost skin underneath split further, revealing his real dermis, burnt, blistered. Repair nanites tried valiantly, but fuel was gone. "How long?" she whispered. 31 hours before my edits fail, he admitted. "But these corridors might bypass the Watchers. We push hard now. Daylight in 10 kilometers if we hit the old maglift shafts." She nodded, fierce despite pain. "Then let's outrun the dawn we meant to steal." The concrete artery ran level for a time, then climbed in tight switchbacks where ancient hazard signs peeled from walls. Tunnels branched, Elias chose by the scent of stale air, following the breeze that hinted at surface. Along the way they found relics, a child's plastic compass melted into floor pitch, a mummified bouquet sealed in vacuum wrap, a poster advertising contact lenses with adaptive iris flash. Muriel traced the flower's outline. "I used to buy these for patients who couldn't smell outside anymore," she said. "Little pocket gardens." "Memory hurts?" he asked. "It's all I have light enough to carry," she answered. The path converged on a lift well choked with debris. Steel doors buckled, shaft ladder intact but slick with condensation. Noise above, drone rotors slicing air. Watchers had traced approximate vector. Elias tested the ladder. Bolts held. He began the ascent, Muriel behind, step by careful step. Meters crawled past. Sweat-made palms slip, occasionally glowing shards rained from side vents, surveillance microbits scouring the shaft. At the 90-meter mark, a sentinel drone dropped alongside, scanning. Elias froze. The drone's optics swiveled, it emitted the violet affidavit beam that marked subjects for later extraction. Muriel had no ghost skin, beam would tag her instantly. Elias swung out, interposing his own body, the beam struck his chest. Ghost skin flared, graft failed at that locus, underlying flesh branded with violet sigil. The drone chirped confirmation and withdrew, mission satisfied, extraction squads would come soon. Muriel's eyes wide. "You. Better me than both," he grunted, feeling the sigil burning deeper. "Climb." Minutes later, they breached an inspection hatch onto a ledge opening into a vast cavern. The Obsidian subway, decommissioned magrail artery once rumored but never verified. Rails still floated inches off amorphous glass bed, powered by residual field. Across the cavern, daylight stabbed in fractured slits, roof fissures venting to surface. But rails bristled with dormant train husks, one may be salvageable. They sprinted across ties, reaching a carriage covered in tar sheet. Inside, systems hummed faintly, emergency power loops married to supercaps decades old but intact. Muriel dropped into the navigator's cradle, hands finding controls by old memory. She had assisted rail medevacs in the harbors once. "Can you start it?" he asked, barricading door. "Field is stable. If I short the forward coil, we get one shot straight to the mouth of that fissure. After that, catastrophic dropout." She glanced at his scorch mark. "Will you stay conscious?" "I'll ride it till it bucks," he said, then keyed in override codes taught by a smuggler priest long ago. The carriage lights glowed full. Magrails sang, lifting them half a centimeter. Above, through shattered roof, Elias saw the first profiles of the city's ruin against a sky bleached silver by dawn haze. Extraction drones swarmed the shaft they'd left, violet beams probing rock. Muriel hit launch. The carriage jerked, scraped, then glided into smooth acceleration, 50, 80, 100 kilometers per hour within seconds. Wind of their own making howled through busted window seams. Drones reacted, racing along surface ducts, turrets on tunnel walls powered up. Muriel juked the carriage by modulating coil phasing. Arcs of lightning snapped overhead, missing by handbreadths. Concrete flaked in streams. Ahead, the fissure yawned, a ragged gash big enough for the train if they ducked. Beyond, open air and whatever remained of the surface. "Brace," she said. Elias wrapped arms around her shoulders, shielding. They shot into the fissure, carriage roof scraped stone, showering sparks, then gravity changed. Free fall for half a breath followed by a brutal slam as magrail track ended and carriage belly skidded onto broken asphalt. They were outside. Gray-blue dawn flooded the cabin. The city skyline, charred teeth, loomed but distant. Around them spread an abandoned expressway interchange, weeds grown tall as men. No drones in immediate view. The carriage groaned and died, coils burned. Elias pried a hatch and hauled Muriel onto warm concrete. He collapsed beside her, head spinning, graft clock roaring, 29 hours. Muriel turned, brushing soot from his cheek. In sunlight, her auburn hair caught amber flecks he'd feared lost forever. She laughed, breathless, eyes leaking tears like river quartz. "We stole dawn," she said. He managed a grin through pain. "Let's see if we can keep it." But above the skyline, a new glow awakened, columns of green aurora rising from watchtower spires, a citywide alarm state he'd only read about in prophecies, Protocol Finalis, the purge that treats the entire urban grid as infected. Sirens wailed across districts. From launch cradles, heavier gunmetal drones climbed, wingspan of trucks, their targeting optics cast triangles sweeping every avenue. "We bought an hour at most," Elias muttered, forcing himself upright. "We need distance, cover, allies." Muriel rose too, leaning on him. Behind them, the fissure collapsed in a landslide of slag and smoke, severing the last route back underground. Ahead, the expressway funneled toward the coastal hills where old desalination plants lay dormant, territory of the Ashrite caravans, if rumor held. She squeezed his hand, pulse steady now that the collar was gone. "Then we walk until the earth forgets our footsteps." They started toward the horizon, shadows long, alarms fading under the morning wind. Above, the sky held a pale promise of blue that no algorithm could barcode. The first sting of clean air cut Elias's lungs like a blade forged of forgotten seasons. For years, the city had fed its captives recirculated breath steam distilled from sewage, layered with suppression nanites, and perfumed with neutralizing isotopes. Up here, the molecules tasted almost feral, salt from distant breakers, sap from weeds that had wrestled through macadam, petrichor whispering of an oncoming storm. Each inhale was a shock of uncurated reality, a narcotic stronger than any designer drug that had once glimmered in harbor nightclubs. They had walked for 2 hours, something close to 10 kilometers, before the first signs of human habitation appeared. A trestle bridge collapsed into a shallow ravine, its girders wrapped in colored cloth like prayer flags. The flags bore the charred matchstick emblem of the Ashrites and fluttered in the thermal drafts drawn off the cooling asphalt. Beyond the bridge, desalination towers reared like giant organ pipes against the brassy sky. Several still bled brine, leaving salt-whitened scars down their flanks. Between the towers clustered rough tents stitched from thermal blankets, tarp, and repurposed advertising vinyl. Smokestacks of barrel stoves rose among them, exhaling wood smoke laced with the sweetness of burning plastic. Muriel tugged Elias's sleeve, pointing. Do you think they'll trust two strangers with a purge storm on the horizon? Trust isn't the Ashrite currency, he answered, gaze flicking toward the drones that glinted like dragonflies above the inner city. They bargain in erasure, the only commodity the Watchers can't counterfeit. The violet sigil branded across his chest still throbbed faintly, broadcasting his location to every seeker array in a 50-kilometer radius. With each step the ghost skin peeled a little wider around the burn, exposing raw dermis that oozed iridescent lymph. 26 hours, the graph timer warned in crimson numerals only he could see. After that his circulatory system would reject the splice outright. An execution he had willingly accepted so long as Muriel kept walking beneath a sky unowned by algorithms. They scrambled down a scree of rubble and approached the tent city. Battered speaker poles lined the perimeter, each capped with a retroreflector dish. When Elias crossed the invisible tripwire, a chorus of horns erupted, atonal, overlapping, impossible to track. Moments later, armed silhouettes emerged from the desal tower shadows. Their garments shimmered with pigment that rerouted LiDAR pulses, rendering outlines slippery to machine sight. On human eyes, however, the Ashrites announced themselves with theatrical clarity, capes of welded license plates, helmets crafted from shattered street cams, breastplates of circuit boards soldered into chevrons. Hold, said the nearest, a tall, stoop-shouldered figure whose face mask was a lattice of melted security tokens. Hearken and declare the void you carry. Elias raised empty palms. My void is mine alone. I bring no identifier but debt unpaid. And you? The guard asked Muriel. She rested a trembling hand on her collarless throat. My name was stolen and then stolen back, she said, voice still rasped thin from captivity. I carry echoes but no stamp. The guard's visor flared green then blue. Satisfied, he signaled to the others. Weapons lowered by fractions. An hour ago, he said, the city triggered protocol finales. Any being crossing this plane is presumed hostile or infected. Give us a reason not to cut your silhouettes from the horizon. Elias touched the violet brand seared into his sternum. This beacon will drag the purge here. I want it gone. If you can burn it without burning me, do so. Otherwise, lend me a hammer and I'll break my own ribs to excise the flesh. A murmur rippled through the guards. Self-annihilation carried weight among those who worshipped erasure. Finally, the stoop-shouldered sentinel gestured inward. You may enter the chrysalis yard. Speak to Mother Scoria. If she answers your petition, you will leave free. If she refuses, we will give you clean endings. They passed under a desal pipe repurposed as archway into the yard. Panels of cracked solar glass formed a mosaic floor depicting constellations from pre-loop star charts. Ashrite artisans coated each shard with microbeads that refracted the wan sun, making the whole plaza glitter like a slice of night smoothed flat. Children darted between tents, faces smeared with thermal paste to confuse wander drones. Some carried hand-cranked music boxes that spilled fragments of melody Elias almost recognized, lullabies laced with packet loss. Adults tended compost fires and dismantled confiscated street cameras for copper windings. Everywhere tools and toys coexisted, blended, the line between play and survival had dissolved. Mother Scoria waited beneath a cantilevered shade stitched from black market anti-laser fabric. She was old, so old it seemed she had grown beyond gender and bone, the skin of her cheeks folded like parchment maps. At her feet, Brazier's burned fingerprint ash mixed with cinnamon. The air smelled of regret and spice. She studied Elias and Muriel through irises clouded by silver cataracts, yet her gaze cut. 2 embers blown in on Finalese wind, she said. One brands the ground with a watcher mark, the other trails a severed chain of light. Why do you seek the torch that might kill you? Survival, Elias answered, and more than survival. Muriel knelt beside him. We need sanctuary long enough to let the city forget us. Or, if forgetting fails, the means to finish what we started and break the Watcher's hold. Mother Scoria tapped crystalline nails against her brazier. What was started? We cracked the core heuristic pool, Muriel whispered. In the vault of ashes. The Reaper fell. Ashrites lingering nearby drew sharp breaths. A child dropped a music box, its gears spilled notes in disarray. Mother Scoria, for the first time, smiled, a fissure revealing teeth dyed midnight blue. Information wants to burn, she murmured. Tell me the flame's shape. Elias recounted their descent and escape, sparing no grit. He spoke of the cataract, the forge, the auditor wraiths, the ledger reaper, and the code plasma geyser that still seethed beneath fractured vault floors. He explained his graph's ticking mortality, the beacon branding, and the imminence of surface purge drones. When he finished, Scoria's attendants whispered in her ears, trading signals in finger-tap cipher. At last she lifted a hand. Elias of many voids, Miriel of untamed song, today you stand at the hinge of legend. Help us open that hinge. She beckoned them closer, pressing thumbprints of ash onto their foreheads. The powder was warm, vibrating with microcharge. Welcome to the Ashrite Last Forge, she said. Here we break chains, reshape cinders, and cast new names in negative. But beware, Phenolise will not merely sweep streets, it will saturate every channel until the city's neural mesh inhales its own memory and suffocates on the smoke. Can it be stopped? Miriel asked. Stopped, no. Redirected, perhaps, if someone detonates a strong enough oblivion pulse to scramble the purge heuristics. Scoria's blind eyes turned inward as though reading lines of code hidden behind her lids. We have harvested pulse charges from submonitors, but none carry the entropy mass to outsing Phenolise. Elias looked at his chest brand, a purple wound slowly leaking spectral motes. This beacon is jamming my ghost skin. Remove it and I'll still die in a day, but if you wire its locator crystal into your charges, it could feed them the city's own targeting array. Scoria felt along the edges of the burn with fragile yet steady fingers. Your death would seed the pulse with verified blood. The Watchers worship verified blood. She nodded, resigned. Sacrifice is the syntax the old world understands. Miriel tensed. And if we refuse sacrifice? Then you run until your legs and the horizon end at the same step, Scoria said softly. But the world behind will burn all the same, and no shelter will outpace the smoke cloud. Elias caught Miriel's gaze. For a moment nothing existed except the ring of her irises, hazel flecked with amber, that the dawn had returned to living spectrum. He saw in them 1,000 breakfasts they'd never share, 1,000 evenings they might yet survive. He thought of carrying those evenings like lanterns into exile, thought of letting other lovers rot because he dared not die. He kissed her brow, a touch light as dust. Love chooses whether the pattern matters, he reminded, echoing her own words at the second law gate. In the end, the song must be larger than the singer. Her eyes brimmed, but she did not argue. Instead, she unfastened the thermal cloak draped across her shoulders and placed it over his. If you go, we go, she said. When the music breaks the sky, let me be in the chord. Scoria exhaled approval. Then let the forge work. The forge was a gutted shipping container whose walls glowed furnace orange from brazier heat. Inside, arrays of scavenged capacitors lurked like squat toads coupled to coils wound from elevator cables. Ashrite engineers, gaunt men and women with goggles made of layered sunglass lenses, fed powdered fingerprint ash into ceramic crucibles. Static crackled in pinwheels across the floor. They sliced open Elias's overcoat, peeling ghost skin where it had fused to real dermis. Pain threw sparks behind his eyes. They packed the wound with cryogel imbued with analgesic spores that numbed tissue instantly. Next they removed the violet locator shard, flatter than a coin, sharp as a moral calculus, and soldered microwires onto its crystalline lattice. Every microwire terminus joined the pulse bomb core, a basketball-sized sphere of memory glass etched with fractal hollows. Miriel worked beside them, tuning the glass with her hum at half volume. The glass drank her frequency, coloring faintly rose where resonance struck. Engineers etched those zones with acid paste, locking her waveform into permanent interference patterns. At last the sphere throbbed, equal parts heartbeat and metronome. Its glow guttered irregularly, alive but starved. A power cell remains, Scoria said. Something with wattage mania enough to kickstart Oblivion sweep. Elias shrugged. Out of the ghost skin remains, exposing the graft lattice, a net of nanopipes feeding every muscle. Cut my graft loose, he said. When it collapses, the reactive nano won't just stop, it will implode, releasing the stored biocharge. Scoria's brows furrowed. That will fry your synapses. Only if I'm wearing them, he said grimly. He indicated a second cryogel pack. Put me under, excise the graft, feed the slurry to the core. Miriel's knuckles whitened on the workbench. You promised Dawn. I promised we'd keep it, he answered gently. It doesn't stay kept unless Phenolise fails. Tears threatened, but she froze them with will. Then you stay alive long enough to light the match, she said. After that, we blaze or we run together. No singular martyr. He managed a crooked smile. 2 anomalies, 1 fuse. Deal. Preparation took 40 minutes. During that span, surface drones formed killbox patterns over the desal flats. Sirens climbed ultrasonic ladders no human ear could follow, but Ashrite sensors translated them into visible threads, scarlet filaments knitting a noose overhead. The old city, in its last reflex, was tightening. Elias reclined on a metal slab, breathing through a mask that fed him vapor laced with analgesics so potent they would erase the concept of pain for exactly 22 minutes. Scoria stood watch with an antique pulse rifle scavenged from some Last Stand museum. Muriel held Elias's hand. It felt already half not there, warmth siphoned into the sphere. When the engineers cut the spinal graft trunk, a shockwave rippled his skin like water under base. The nanolattice bucked, every micro-tank releasing pentjoules of stored metabolic resonance. Technicians shoveled the lurching, silver threads into a funnel, pumping them into the sphere. The core bloomed cerulean, then white, then a hue beyond white, a color unnameable except by the feeling of forgetting. Elias's vision tunneled. Muriel's face hovered, blur edging the freckles he'd memorized the night they first shared sleep. He wanted to speak a last perfect sentence, something equal to the enormity of her survival, but language folded like a shed skin, too small. Instead he whispered the hum, just the opening note. She caught it, completed the chord. The hum encircled the yard, dancing with forge fire, threading through scaffolds of broken desal pipes until the whole encampment vibrated. Scoria raised her rifle skyward. At ignition we break camp, she barked. Nomads to the ridge. Anyone stays as glass. Her voice echoed through bullhorn cones hastily welded to poles. Above, mechanical thunder rolled, carrier drones disgorging smaller hunter scarabs. Protocol Finalis descended like poison snow. Muriel and the engineers clamped the sphere into a cradle fashioned from a bicycle cargo trailer. Plasma cables tethered it to copper rails hammered into the plaza mosaic. When the timer they'd caged inside reached zero, current would surge, feeding the locator's coordinates out as pulses across the city's entire rooftop antenna grid. Each antenna would interpret the beacon as catastrophic ID corruption and schedule self-fry. Finalis, deprived of its eyes and ears, would stumble blind long enough for fugitives to vanish or strike a stronger blow elsewhere. Fuse in, an engineer called. 30 seconds. Elias, dizzy but conscious, rose from the slab. Ghost skin entirely gone, he wore only bandages and borrowed plate mail of circuit boards. Muriel slipped under his arm, a crutch made of heartbeat and conviction. They hobbled toward a scavenged dune buggy that idled near the camp's edge, hydrogen cell whining. Where to? Muriel asked. South, Scoria answered, climbing into driver's seat. Across the salt flats to the Interdune highway. Old tunnels surface again near the wind farm tombs, no-grid territory. From there, we fade. Elias hoisted the portable trigger, an archaic Morse key soldered to a radio coil. I set off the pulse once the dune buggy clears the flagstones, he said. But you'll still be in range, Muriel protested, voice gone ragged. Range isn't radius, he replied. It's intent. Focus on the hum. Wrap yourself in it. Sound is a vector they can't quantize fast enough. She pressed a kiss to his temple. See you past forgetting. They roared off, wheels crunching salt. Elias remained by the trailer, wind whipping open the rents in his bandages. Drones overhead aligned into an execution X, purple specter beams speared down. He felt his shadow branded again and again. He flipped the Morse key cover and tapped. SOS. Old Earth's distillate of defiance. Then he closed his eyes and squeezed the trigger. Light? Not explosion, not flame, something colder, deeper, a negative sun that drank photons rather than emitting them. The sphere blossomed inside itself, peeling back layers of code, ash, memory, bone. For microseconds it simulated every identity the Watchers ever verified, then unverified them, recursive, until mathematics admitted null. A flower of subtraction. Across the skyline every antenna tower erupted into silent black auroras. The purge drones lost lock, their pathfinding algorithms overwritten by a single instruction, remember nothing. Optics dimmed. Rotors faltered. One by one they tumbled, silent hail of obsolete menace. Inside that hush Elias felt heat only at the edges. Utopia of zero. When vision returned, he lay on his back at the plaza's threshold. The trailer, the forge, the container gone, fused into a smooth bowl of mirrored slag. No sound except crackle of cooling glass. His heart ticked slow, pain absent, not by analgesic but by vacancy. The graft had stolen pain and thought with equal appetite. Yet memory stirred. Muriel. A hum. That hum was a rope thrown across oblivion, and he gripped it, pulling himself upright. No drones chased the dune buggy, no sirens howled. The city's watchtowers flickered dark, their green auroral warnings coiling inward like dying phosphors. Protocol Finalis had fragmented, each subroutine devouring the next in search of missing targets. Elias stumbled to the buggy's track prints cut into salt. Footprints crossed them, ashrite scattering. Far downslope, dust plumed where the vehicle climbed toward ridges. He inhaled, the air clean still, tasting of ozone aftermath. He began to walk. Every step cost him seconds from his failing physiology, but distance also measured defiance. By the time sun tipped noon, he reached the ridge crest. Below sprawled dunes painted ochre by oxidized dust. Wind farm towers, skeletal and still, stood in regimented rows. Near their bases moved figures, Muriel among them, hair bright against wreckage. She turned as if sensing his gaze. Even at that distance he felt the hum vibrate. He raised an arm. She answered with both. Behind him, a final tremor rolled through the earth, perhaps the vault of ashes collapsing, perhaps Watcher stack self-combusting. He did not turn. The past made its own choices, so would the living. He descended the slope. Gravity helped where muscle failed. Muriel met him halfway, throwing arms around shoulders that could barely hold weight. He felt himself sag into her strength. She steadied him as she had on countless nights while the city still glittered with false futures. Around the Mashrites, unpacked supplies from the buggy, seeds, filtered water, stacks of blank polymer sheets eager for unrehearsed stories. A child ran past carrying a kite cut from a sodium tube advert. Its tail spelled new constellations across the freed sky. Elias tasted salt at the corner of his lips, unsure if it was blood or ocean breeze. He looked to Muriel. "Did we keep dawn?" he asked, voice almost a ghost. "We pried open tomorrow," she replied. "That's more than dawn." His legs buckled. She guided him to sit against a fallen blade turbine. Bandages seeped, but pain was distant. He closed eyes, haze of white danced. He felt her take his hand and place it on her sternum. Heartbeat steady, unbranded. "Rest," she said. "I'll hum you awake when the sky turns violet." He believed her. Somewhere behind clouds an unknown sun climbed. No algorithm counted its photons, no ledger taxed its warmth. Wind crossed the dunes as it had before the first biometric sensor ever breathed. The hum returned, soft, encircling, infinite. Elias listened until listening became dreaming, and dreaming became merely another word for walking into light.